as I think he said as I was going up the wheelchair elevator, I am the founder and executive director of an organization called Treasures, and we're an outreach and support group to women in the commercial sex industry and victims of exploitation and trafficking. And we're based in the San Fernando Valley, which, as you may know, is the porn capital of the world, where 90% of all legal porn is filmed, manufactured, and or distributed. And so we are really in the epicenter of the adult industry. And we have three main areas of focus: outreach, care, and training. Our outreach efforts are directed towards strip clubs, towards women in the porn industry, towards women in prostitution and escorting through online forums, and youth in juvenile detention centers, many of whom have been sexually exploited. And we provide them with mentoring, support groups. We do Christmas, we do Thanksgiving, we do hiking, we do family together, and we just give them the resources that they need to rebuild their lives. And then the third area of focus is training, and we train other people to replicate this grassroots church-based model of outreach in their cities. And the reason I do this is because I myself am an overcomer of sexual exploitation. And I'm going to share my story with you tonight in a minute. But first of all, I want to say this. It's an honor to be here. It's truly an honor. I've been in ministry for 16 years. I've never been asked to speak at a men's conference. And so I really just commend your pastors and your leadership for inviting a woman into a space like this and giving voice. I think it's courageous. And I think that it is, I really, in praying about showing up here, so my mom actually died this morning. And I knew that it was coming. She's had dementia. She's been on hospice for a while. And this week I got the news that it would be a few more days. And was hoping that the timing wouldn't be today. And I prayed and I asked God, do I still show up? And what I felt like he reminded me is that they who sow in tears shall reap a harvest of joy. And I just really felt compelled to be here with you because I really believe that there's an anointing for breakthrough on tonight. And I am also choosing to do this partly in honor of my mother, who, to her credit, although much of my story is connected to the mistakes that she made as a mother and the way that left me vulnerable, she was always supportive, and she always supported me in this work and in this vision. And when I think about my story and when I think about her story, which in a moment I'm going to tell you my story, it's her story. It basically, I mean, you could go thing by thing that I went through, and it absolutely mirrored what she went through as a young girl. And we're talking about generational things here. We're talking about generational brokenness. And in the same way that my mother's brokenness was generationally passed on to me, and I continued on experiencing many of the things that she experienced generationally, I really believe that there's breakthrough for generations in this room today. And that you guys have the opportunity to be a part of breakthrough for generations. And so that's why I'm here. So I'm gonna tell my story. Thank you. I'm not sure. My earring does keep hitting. I heard that. I'm not sure. I'm just gonna try it and see how much I'm comfortable sharing in this context. Can I just? Nice catch. That's good. That's good. Okay, so so I was raised in a very violent neighborhood and a really chaotic home, and again, it was generational. My mother was not a bad person, but she was a very broken person who parented out of her brokenness. I was exposed to porn at the age of 3 years old by a male relative, and then sexually abused throughout my life by multiple people, and raped as a teen. And I can say that now as casually as I just did, not because it didn't have a huge impact in my life, but because my heart is free, and my past doesn't have a grip on me anymore. But there was certainly a time where those experiences felt like they defined me. And my mother did not have the tools to protect me from the abuse that was going on even when she was aware of it, because she taught me what she learned as a girl, and it's your fault. If you weren't wearing shorts and tank tops, this wouldn't be happening because Harmony you should know how men are. This is how they are. And I really think she thought she was preparing me for the world that she knew, which was a world where men abuse and exploit. And that was her experience, and that became my experience. One of my abusers was my mother's boyfriend. I ran away from home to get away, and my mom finally called and said, he's gone, you can come back. And I came home, but she left me at 13 with my 8-year-old brother with $20 and a book of food stamps, which are government vouchers for food. This is dating me because now they have the cards, right? But this is food stamps. And obviously that didn't last long. After the $20 in food stamps were gone, I started stealing to support my brother and I, and stealing from the liquor store. And it was at that point that I became vulnerable to an older boy in the neighborhood who now I can look back and see that he had the intention of exploiting me. But at the time, all I saw was a knight in shining armor, because he would buy us food and I didn't have to steal. And he would make me feel protected. There was a gang war in my neighborhood, and there were gunshots every night and just violence all around me. And he would say, I've got your back, I'll take care of you. And so that meant something to me. So I became very attached to this person. It led me into a 7-year-long abusive relationship, and he became my pimp. And I started working in the commercial sex industry as a stripper at the age of 19, giving him all my money. He was using me to recruit other women, and my life was just in a downward spiral, essentially. And the big catalyst for change for me began with a friendship, and she didn't have a master's degree. She wasn't in ministry. She was a 20-nothing-year-old college student who just met me where I was at and loved me unconditionally and didn't judge me, and her friendship was not contingent on me going to church with her, but loved me. And I eventually thought, there's something in her life that I see that I'm missing, and if it has something to do with this whole church God thing, then maybe I'll try it. And so I did. And anyways, I have a memoir, Scars and Stilettos, and maybe I'll mention it a little bit more later, but that's the snapshot of the story. But if you're interested, or if you have people in your life who might be interested, I wrote a book, Scars and Stilettos. You can check it out. But I want to move forward to the content of today. So I want to apologize in advance for what we're about to do together, because I was talking to Tony on the phone, and he's like, I want you to go through this, and I want you to tell him that, and I want you to go through this, and I want you to tell him that, and I want you to go through this. And I'm like, that's too much. And he's like, nope, they can take it. We want the truth. I'm like, that's a lot. So if this is a lot, it's just a lot, but it's the truth. So we're going to talk about it. Is that cool? Okay. All right. So he said you can handle it. So the first thing I want to mention that I think is important to talk about is the fact that 70% of female trafficking victims are trafficked into the commercial sex industry. That means they're working in porn, strip clubs, escorting, massage parlors, every single area where the commercial sex industry operates. And the reason I think that's important is, especially as there's a lot more talk about trafficking, I still think there's a lack of understanding about what it actually looks like, especially in the United States. And it's very important for us to draw this connection that you cannot disconnect the commercial sex industry from trafficking. And we're going to continue to unpack that specifically later as we look at how porn specifically is related to trafficking. And I also want to say this, that I understand that sexual addiction and porn addiction is driven by shame. And I don't think it's helpful for people to feel shame about these issues, because it's going to drive that behavior deeper, right? So my intention in bringing all of this to you is not to be judgmental, not to bring judgment, but to hopefully bring some truth, so that we can respond with compassion and with action, right? So I just want you to know that that's my heart. So we're going to look at, this is called the exploitation continuum, or the abuse continuum. And so first of all, as we hear about the issue of trafficking, it's important to look at all of the other issues that trafficking is connected to. So first you have the issue of sexual abuse, which we're all familiar with that. Earlier someone mentioned that 1 in 4 girls have had a history of sexual abuse. Today, now it's moving towards 1 in 3. Up to 90% of women in the commercial sex industry have a history of sexual abuse. That is not a coincidence, right? And so for me, what I can tell you is that my experience as someone who had a history of sexual abuse who ended up in the commercial sex industry, that those two things were very connected, because my history of abuse taught me to feel comfortable with being sexualized and objectified. and those are job requirements for the strip club. So my history of sexual abuse prepared me to work in the strip club. So sexual exploitation is when someone uses the sexuality or attractiveness of another person for their own gain, right? The difference between sexual exploitation and trafficking is trafficking includes force, fraud, and coercion. How many of you guys have heard that about trafficking? Force, fraud, and coercion. Anybody? Okay. So by federal definition, in order for it to be considered trafficking, someone has to be lured into this commercial sex industry through force, fraud, or coercion, or they are a minor, in which case you don't have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. CSEC is an acronym that stands for the commercial sexual exploitation of children. So all of these things are forms of sexual abuse. Sex trafficking and CSEC are forms of sexual exploitation, and CSEC, the commercial sexual exploitation of children, is a form of trafficking. And oftentimes it's not so black and white where someone falls on this continuum. And so just as an example of that, there was a young woman who years ago we were walking alongside. She had a horrific history of sexual abuse. She was forced into prostitution by what we call a guerrilla pimp, which we'll go into a little bit later. And she was being beaten and treated poorly and forced into prostitution. Well, so that by definition is sex trafficking, right? So then she's at a party, she meets a man, and he says, I know this guy you're with, he's awful, he beats you, I can help you escape him, and you don't have to work in prostitution, you can work in strip clubs because you're gonna make good money there, and I'll be your manager, and I'll help you with your career, and you can give me a cut of your money, and I'm gonna treat you nicely, right? And so he didn't traffic her, but he was exploiting her because he was profiting off of her sexuality, but he wasn't the one who trafficked her. Then time goes by, we're walking alongside her. She finally gains the courage to walk away from this exploitive relationship with this person that was like her boyfriend, right? And so she walks away from him. She tries to get a normal job, and unfortunately, like a lot of the women, she had mental health issues that were really wreaking havoc in her life. She was dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, having panic attacks. So you think of someone who has had the kind of history of trauma, and I didn't go into her childhood trauma, but I'm telling you it was awful. And someone with that kind of history of trauma, and now you say, okay, get your resume together, start going on interviews, right? And it's not that easy when you're dealing with that level of mental health issues. So she had a difficult time, she couldn't find work, and she ended up going back into the strip clubs. If you were to walk up to her and say, are you here by choice? She would say, yeah, right? Because there was no one trafficking her anymore, there was no one exploiting her anymore. But when you look at her history, the issue of choice suddenly is not so black and white. And what is choice without options? And in fact, 89% of women in the commercial sex industry say they want to leave, but don't see any other options, right? And so what is choice without options? So when you look at why and how would a person end up in the commercial sex industry, you look at, there's two kind of factors that we're looking at. We're looking at vulnerability and we're looking at environmental factors. So, and there's an interplay of the two. So you see the inside of the woman are listed different vulnerabilities that really play into this. Gender, having a history of sexual abuse, which we mentioned, foster care. 70% of trafficking victims are from the foster care system. That's because pimps and exploiters know how to exploit the most vulnerable in our society, right? Lack of work or education, being a single mom, a minority, a runaway, having a disability, all of these things make a person more vulnerable and therefore more susceptible to possibly being exploited or trafficked, or choosing to work in the sex industry. And then you have the environmental factors. Demand. This is a supply and demand issue. It's as simple as that. If there were no demand, there would be no supply. It's a supply and demand issue. The reason there are more women working in the sex industry today than any other time in history is because there's more demand today than any other time in history. And so that's the solution, is reducing and ending demand, really. Pimps and traffickers who stand to profit off of the girls, the cultural norms, promoting male promiscuity, the fact that we culturally promote that, right? Or even the gentleman before me, I forgot his name, was talking about just normalizing watching porn. Like, it's fine, it's normal, right? So that's a cultural norm that plays into this. The glamorization of the sex industry and media, we're seeing this especially with strip clubs that have moved away from a seedy image of like strip clubs of the past to these like gentlemen's clubs with chandeliers and club chairs, and cigar rooms, right? So they're trying to kind of shed that seedy image to become more mainstream, more culturally acceptable and normal. And then the way we normalize the sexualization of women in our culture plays into this as well. And you can see this, when you look at even children's toys. So when you think about the way women are sexualized in our culture, in the 1980s, look at Strawberry Shortcake. She looked like a doll, right? And then you go to 2003, she looks like maybe a 7-year-old. 2007, she's changing, she's morphing into 2009. She has like a form-fitting, short-dressed, and it's this more sexualized image of Strawberry Shortcake, because you can see that even in her evolution. And in the toys that we give our children. Brat dolls, Barbie is of course a culprit. And basically what we're saying to girls from a very early age is this is what femininity looks like, and it's a hyper-sexualized version of femininity. But this is what females are being taught from a young age, that this is what femininity looks like, right? This is, I think, a 10-year-old in an advertising campaign. And one of my favorite things to do is when I'm driving along, looking at billboards. And if you look at like billboards that have women in them, right? Picture a man in that same position, draped over a car half naked. You would be like, why is he half naked bending over a car, right? But you see a woman like that all the time and you don't think anything of it. Why? Because we are conditioned to think that that's normal, right? So that's one of the things that's playing into this. As I mentioned, 89% of women want to leave but see no other options for survival, and that's part of what Treasures does, is help them to find and see other options for survival. I did want to mention, if anyone's interested, I'm happy to share this PowerPoint. If you guys sign up for our newsletter, I would be happy to share the PowerPoint with you if you guys are interested in getting it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, next thing, the tactics that pimps and traffickers use, right? Because there are different tactics and it looks like different things. So first of all, many of you guys probably have seen this portrayed in the media, which is the gorilla pimp that uses brute force, violence, drugs to overpower their victims, right? So you guys have seen the movies with this kind of pimp, right? A few of you? Okay. Unfortunately, this is not always the most effective way to exploit a woman or a girl. And so they've come up with some other ways. Romeo pimps are exploiters that use the prospect of romance or pose as a potential boyfriend or love interest to the girls. And so this is the kind of exploiter that I had. I didn't see him as my pimp. I saw him as my boyfriend. I thought we had kind of a dysfunctional Jerry Springer type relationship and we had drama, but I thought he was my boyfriend, right? When I go to juvenile detention centers with my husband and I meet with these girls who some of them were brought into prostitution at 10 years old, right? And 12 and 14 or whatever, they're in love with their exploiters. They think of them as their boyfriends because the manipulation is that the exploiters use is so convincing that it's you and I against the world. I'm all you've got. We're just in it together. We're just going to make $1 and we're going to get in, get out. Or, this is just so we can have a better dream for the future. And, I'm going to take care of you, right? This is a very effective way, unfortunately, to exploit a girl, especially a girl who is in the foster care system and doesn't have a father in her life, right? And so that's what we see a lot. The next kind of exploiter, my friend Rachel Thomas of the Sowers Education Group coined this term, CEO pimp, and I'm so glad that she did because I was seeing this and we didn't have language for it. And this is essentially when someone uses the promise of a modeling or acting career as the lure, as the bait. And in her particular case, her story is public, like I said, of the Sowers Education Group. She came from a very good family. Her dad was a deacon in the church. Her mom was an attorney, upper middle class, really stable, healthy family. She was at college, at a college party, and a woman came up to her and said, "You're beautiful. my friend here is a talent agent, and he really thinks that you have something special. They used forced recruiters, right? You're more likely to trust another female. So pimps know that, and they'll send another female to do the recruiting, and it's a forced recruiting situation. And so anyways, so he used the promise of you're gonna make money. You know, he got her work actually on legitimate sets of music videos. This is not an uncommon story, unfortunately. And then, oh, by the way, you owe me money for that photo shoot and that flight and that this and that, and there's a debt now, right? And oh, you've got to do this to pay the debt you owe. In other situations, that I'm moving away from her story, you know, they will, they'll drug and rape and tape that, and then your modeling career and your acting career are going to be ruined if you don't do exactly what we say, because now we've got you on tape, right? So this is a type of pimping that is known as CEO pimping. We see this a lot, especially in places like Los Angeles, big cities where there is an entertainment industry. So those are the three main types of exploiters. And now we're going to kind of move into porn and trafficking, which is the next. Oh, this is a different size screen. The next topic. So porn and trafficking. So this right here is the prevalence of these things in women in porn versus women in the general public. So higher rates of depression, poverty, foster care, homelessness. And one thing that I think is super surprising, is it on here? Yeah, lived in poverty in the past 12 months, which I think might be surprising to a lot of people, because the idea of porn is that you would be making money in it, right? But that's not the case. A lot of the women in porn aren't making money very much at all. Especially when it comes to amateur porn, oftentimes they also end up accruing a lot of debt because they're forced to pay for their hair, their makeup, their clothing, their transportation, and when all is said and done, they have nothing to show for the work that they just did. So violence against women in porn. This is super important to look at. So they looked at the top 50 selling porn movies of all time, the top 50 mainstream porn. Mainstream. This is not even like niche porn, right? And there were over 3,000 instances of physical violence against women in mainstream porn. Porn and violence are connected like this, right? And the reason that's important is because there's a conditioning that happens where people who watch porn regularly and violence is embedded in porn, it is a part of the nature, they begin to start coupling violence and sex together in their mind. And that kind of couples together and gets kind of fused together. And a lot of research shows that people who, let me look at this. Men who view pornography are more likely to show behavioral intent to rape and more likely to believe rape myths. They're more likely to, porn has been associated with increase in verbal and physical aggression among males and females alike. And so what we're seeing is violence in porn is directly related to the kind of violence and sexual assault that we're seeing happen in society, right? Because as a person is watching it, that becomes normalized. This is important because it's about demand. There's a lot of different numbers out there about how much porn revenue, this, that, and the other, but this is what is true, that porn websites receive more unique monthly visitors than Twitter, Amazon, and Netflix combined. So the demand for porn is huge. And again, the reason that's important is because this is a supply and demand issue. So we are gonna watch a video that's from my friends at, what are they called? Rescue? I love them. What are they called? Rescue Freedom. Rescue Freedom. They did this video. So we're going to take a minute and watch this video.
This is Anna. Wait, don't click to someone else yet, because Anna's stuck here on your computer screen. And while you can walk away, her image is stuck on the internet. See, your fantasy is Anna's nightmare. There's a good chance recruiters lured her with flattery. Perhaps they baited her with cash. Maybe they even tranquilized her with date rape drugs. And if Anna's like many others, she stays sedated with alcohol, weed, or coke to numb the pain. Chances are she faces STDs and HIV because she's denied access to protection. We don't know what she's been through because we only see Anna smiling, and they keep showing Anna smiling so that you'll keep watching. See, pornography is integral to human trafficking and prostitution. In 9 countries, almost half, 49%, said that pornography was made of them while they were in prostitution. This generation fights sex trafficking more than anyone ever has, and more than anyone ever has, this generation consumes porn. Fighting human trafficking and then watching porn is like protesting a corrupt politician and then donating to his campaign. You browse privately, going from Anna to Zoe and back to Anna. Watch your favorite fantasy and then walk away. But Anna's still there. She's stuck there, stuck in this life because you click. Each click, each link, each URL visit and play button, this is the currency of porn. This is the price of Anna's life. The $100 billion pornography industry is fueling the appetite for children as well. Teenage girls now make up the biggest slice of viewable porn, which by definition is considered trafficking. The demand for porn fuels the trafficking industry, and you can take away that demand. You can cut the cord on this machine. You can bankrupt the system. You can empty the pimp's pockets. You can free Anna by simply refusing to click.
Okay, porn and trafficking. So, first of all, porn is a gateway to purchasing sex, right? What numerous studies have shown is that people who watch porn are more likely to become sex buyers. And here's why. Because of the progressive nature of porn. So usually what happens is very much like a substance addiction. You know, there's a certain level of porn or certain thing that elicits a certain level of high, dopamine being released, right? And at a certain point, that's not enough anymore. And there has to be something new, something maybe darker, something different that's going to elicit that same level of dopamine as before. So the addiction to porn can tend to progress to the point that some people then choose to act out and then become a sex buyer. Another reason for this is a lot of times people want to reenact the fantasies that they develop in porn, and they know they can't probably do that in their normal settings, right? So I believe it's 80% of women in prostitution, 80% report that their clients, their customers, ask them to reenact something they had seen in porn, 80%. So very highly connected there. And then numerous studies have shown that watching porn increases the likelihood that a person would eventually become a sex buyer. And increasing in demand for prostitution directly relates to increase in trafficking. Here's why. 84% of women in prostitution are under third-party control. 84%. That means they're under the control of a pimp or a trafficker. So, and we're in California in 2020, I believe it's coming up. There's a movement to decriminalize prostitution. This is important for us to be educating ourselves about and thinking about, because there's this whole belief, and there's even anti-trafficking language around it, saying this is going to make people safer. This is going to make it easier to regulate, right? No, this is not true. First of all, what we know in all of the other places in the world, from a study that looked like, I think it was 150 countries where prostitution was decriminalized or legalized, it is directly correlated with an increase in trafficking and exploitation. You look at Nevada, and it has I think the highest rate of the illegal sex trade in the country because of the counties where prostitution is legal. So legalization and decriminalization does not decrease trafficking, right? And 84% of women in prostitution are under third-party control. So what that means is as people are watching porn and more likely to buy sex, that is more likely that they're hiring a prostituted person who is very likely under the control of a pimp or a trafficker. So do you see how that's a direct through line, right? Obviously, I'm not saying everyone who watches porn ends up doing that, but there is a very high correlation there. The second way that porn and trafficking are connected is that 49% of women in prostitution report that they were filmed without their consent or knowledge. That's 49% who figured out that they were being filmed without their consent or knowledge. So there are more, we have to assume, that were filmed and they didn't know about it. They're being either filmed by their pimps, their johns, And then that material is then distributed online. Another way that porn and trafficking are connected is that often women report experience, like I mentioned, being drugged, raped, filmed, and that is streamed and distributed. And then the other thing that exploiters will do, as I mentioned earlier, is then use that footage for blackmail. And so there's no way to tell when you're watching porn if someone is a willing participant in that or not, right? Especially if that kind of coercion and threat is happening behind the scenes. Then you have the issue of pimps know that they are going to make more money off of women if they advertise them as porn stars. So they film porn of their victims and then put that porn online, sell the porn, then use the porn to advertise the victim to then work in prostitution. So, and again, a person watching those videos would have no idea the kind of coercion and manipulation that went on behind the scenes to get that person in front of a camera, right? A lot of the, even girls in juvie, children in juvie that we talk to experience this. The other way it's connected is that teen porn is one of the most popular searches, right? It's more than tripled. The search has more than tripled between 2005 and 2013. And 1/3 of total daily searches for porn are for teen porn. Teens are not adults. They are underage. And if they're using real actual teens, which in many cases they are, then that by federal definition is trafficking, because that is a minor who cannot give consent, and you don't even have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. And then we get into child pornography. 1 in 5 porn images online are of a child. The United States hosts the majority of all of the world's porn on our servers. 55% of all child porn is hosted on servers in the United States. 55%. That's because there are networks of people that are trading child porn, right? And the porn might be filmed in other places, but it's hosted on US servers, because when you look globally at this, often the buyers are Westerners. And then finally, you have the issue of consent versus coercion when it comes to, now we're back. So I just walked you through some of the ways that porn is directly connected to trafficking. So it's a gateway, right? Women filmed without consent or knowledge, women forced into being filmed, women blackmailed with the film, pimps using the porn to advertise women. We went into child porn. And so now we're back into mainstream porn, right? So the issue of consent versus coercion gets a little gray here, because these are some of the very normal tactics that are happening in mainstream porn. So a girl will decide, a willing girl who doesn't have a pimp or a trafficker, right? Who said, I'm going to choose to work in porn. Now, we've already talked about the vulnerability that might have led her to that situation. We've already talked about the environmental factors that might have led her to that situation. But she says, I'm going to choose to work in porn. Well, she says, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, here are my boundaries, right? And time again, what you hear is she gets booked for a shoot, she shows up, and they say, you need to do X, Y, Z. And she says, no, I don't do X, Y, Z, these are my boundaries. And they say, you better do X, Y, Z, we're not paying you, we're gonna ruin your career. And if that doesn't work, they'll resort to degradation and name calling and blackballing. And so often, very often, girls who are working in porn by choice, who try to set boundaries for themselves around what they're comfortable and not comfortable doing, are then forced and coerced into doing things that are way outside of their comfort zone. And in addition to that, the other thing that happens is your career, most people, you know, the term porn star, most people don't become porn stars, right? Most people end up having a 6 to 9 month career in porn, where the porn industry chews them up and spits them out. And if they want to continue to try to carve out a space for themselves and try to make a living, they're going to have to do deeper and darker things, right? And fill in some of those, the demand for some of the niche stuff. So the issue of consent versus coercion, there's a lot of gray around it, even when it comes to women who would say that they're there by choice. Here's the good news. You guys ready for some good news? Okay, I'm ready for some good news too. Honestly, I told Tony, I'm like, I don't even like hearing myself talk about it for an hour. Like, it's just awful. It just really is. But it is the truth, and we have to be aware of it, right? But here's the good news, is that when we talked about the environmental factors that were contributing to a vulnerable person being more likely to be exploited, we can be a different kind of environmental factor. We can create a different kind of environment. And you can never underestimate the impact that individuals can have. Parents, social workers, churches, educators, neighbors, peers. When I look at the trajectory of my own life, and I'm sure you guys can do this in your own, I think about the people along the way that basically spoke life into me, and I'm here today because of them. And sometimes it was a small seed planted. Like I remember I was living in a group home, and there was a peer counselor there who I knew was from my same neighborhood. But he was older. And he said he had to go because he was going to college. Like, he had classes. And I was like, you go to college? And he was like, yeah. I was like, that's dumb. Because I thought that was like the man's education. They're trying to brainwash you, tell you how to think, that kind of thing. My mother was a different kind of person. Anyway, so we didn't value education in my family. Let me put it that way. In fact, we thought it was brainwashing. So I said, that's dumb. And he said, I'm going to be the first black president of the United States. It was not Obama. That would have made a wonderful story. I wish. But I was so moved by his plan and his dream and the fact that he saw education as a way to accomplish that. I kid you not, I made a decision that day, and he'll never know this, that education was going to be a life raft for me. And I almost didn't graduate. They called me and they said, if you miss one more class, you're not graduating. I went from almost not graduating to completely turning my grades around. I couldn't get into a university at that time because my grades were so bad, but I went to a JC. I became a 4.0 student. I ended up transferring to UCLA, where I graduated magna cum laude and got a master's degree, and I just was honored alumna of the year. It's not alumni, it's alumna. Thank you. I was like, what's an alumna? I had to look it up. It's like, oh, female alumni. Okay. Because homeboy said he was going to be the first black president of the United States. He just planted a seed, right? And I think about other people. Like, I had a court-mandated therapist. And, I'm going to tell you a different one. I had a school psychologist. And I would come into her office because someone told her I was a mess. And do you think I was talking about what was going on at home? No. Like, I don't want to know. Like, what's going on, Harmony? But listen, I think I'm losing my hearing. And I actually think I'm losing my eyesight too. And I'm having these kinds of pains and stuff. You know what she did? She didn't say, you're crazy, Harmony. Your ears are fine, your eyes are fine, but let's talk about what's really going on at home. She did not do that. She took me to get my ears checked, which were fine. She took me to get my eyes checked, which were fine. I was somaticizing. If any of you guys are familiar with this, I was taking all of my emotional pain and turmoil and turning it into physical symptoms. And she knew that, but she met me there, and she met me where I was at, and I built trust with her. Did I ever tell her the full? No, I didn't tell her the full story of my life, but I remember her, and I remember thinking, one day I want to help people. One day I want to be like her, right? And it was all because she planted that seed, right? So I love this saying that I heard recently, that you can open an orange and you can see how many seeds are in it. You can count them. You can count. There are this many seeds in that orange, right? But you never know how many oranges are in a seed. You never know how many oranges are in that one seed, right? And so we can never underestimate the impact that we can have as we decide to plant seeds and be a different kind of environmental force. And you as men, you guys have a place that I don't have. You guys have a voice that I don't have. You guys have a role that I don't have. I have the honor today of being married to an incredible man. I'm talking about top-notch, cream of the crop, and is like not intimidated by me pursuing the call of God on my life. He supports it fully. He stays home with the kids. I mean, he has a job too, but like if I need to go, like I'm here, he's with the kids because it's not easy. He's waiting on me hand and foot at this time, actually, in my life. Good man. And you know what he does at night? He goes into my daughter's room. It's his stepdaughter, who, by the way, when he proposed to me, he proposed to her. And he said vows to her in our wedding because he knows the role a man can have in the life of a female, of a daughter. And he goes into her room at night and he tells her the truth about who she is. And he always says to me, he says, if I don't tell her who she is, someone else will. And he goes and he speaks the truth to her. Johnny, do you know that you are loved? Do you know that you're valuable? Do you know that there's a great plan for your life? I don't even know all the things because I'm not invited into those moments, but he speaks life over her, right? And you guys have a voice that we as women don't have. And you also have access to conversations that we don't have access to. And so I'm going to go through a couple of things that I think are a battle plan for you men who are in this room, that I invite you to participate in this battle plan. The first thing is to consider before consuming. And I stole this directly from Fight the New Drug. Do you guys know I saw someone with a t-shirt. Yes, I love Fight the New Drug. And to consider what you've learned tonight. Consider, if nothing else, part of my goal in sharing my story and part of my goal in sharing is to humanize the woman on the other end of the dollar, to humanize the woman on the other end of the screen so that you can consider that she's a human, right? And so to consider before consuming. I actually was just at a conference in DC last week on exploitation. It was amazing. It was like a global summit for people all over the world who were doing work in the anti-exploitation movement. And Fight the New Drug was there. And I met Doug Osmond, who's a part of their leadership team, who was amazing. And we were just chatting, and he starts telling me this stuff about how he coaches the men in his life. And I was like, oh my gosh, can I just real professional get my iPhone and just video you and take it to this men's conference? And he said, sure. So you'll hear my voice because I'm not a professional videographer and I should have been quiet. But I was like, So it's not a professional video, but this is me having a conversation with Doug and just sharing something that I thought would be super helpful to share with you guys tonight. Are you cool with that?
I was exposed to pornography at 11 years old. I mean, it's pretty standard, when you're hearing these stats. And I struggled for 22 years of my life, and it ruined everything that was good in my life. And so I finally hit my rock bottom back in 2011 and was able to pull out of it. And so I know what it feels like to be stuck in that trap. I know the devastation that it causes, not just to yourself as the addict, but to people around you. When people understand the science behind what's happening in the brain from the frontal cortex and the limbic system, and how the limbic system is your survival brain, and it has three functions: to avoid pain, to seek pleasure, and not die. That's a pretty powerful part of the brain. And then you understand that it realizes and remembers when people view pornography, there's dopamine released in the brain, and that's happy juice, right, that I like to call it. So since it's survival, it can actually override the frontal cortex and your thoughts and your decision-making and morals and all of those things, to the point where people will act out even though they swear they'll never do it again. And so they get triggered and they go down that path. Well, then once it gets its dopamine, the limbic calms down and goes back to sleep, and then the frontal cortex kicks back in. It's like, well, how could you do that? You're a horrible person. Shame, 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 shame. And the problem with that cycle is all that does is it kicks the limbic system back into gear because you're feeling discomfort and you're feeling pain, and that's part of the brain is to avoid all that. And if you're able to understand that, and when you're triggered, you say, okay, it wants to act out. It's like a crying baby. Sometimes you just got to put the baby in the crib and leave the room for a minute, right? You just understand it. You talk through it. You call a friend. You go do something. You get out of that moment. It's amazing how quickly it will calm down, and it's amazing how much success you can have in recovery when you're able to do that. And what I'll tell people that I've worked with and people that I've mentored and shared my story with and helped them through their recovery is, for the next, if it had to be the next 30 minutes, the next 5 minutes, don't look at porn. Anyone can do that. If I say for the next hour, for the next day, that's where I don't care about tomorrow. I don't care about it. Okay, don't worry about it. Because in our minds, if someone were to tell me now to never eat a Reese's peanut butter cup or an Oreo cookie again ever in my life, I'd go out and binge eat them right now because that's just too painful for me to understand. Right. But if you told me don't eat a Reese's cup for the next hour, all right, I can do that. It's not a big deal. And then once I hit that, so when I tell it with pornography, go the next hour without viewing pornography. When you finish that hour, I want you to celebrate like it's the greatest thing you've ever done. Because then also you get these positive feelings and emotions that you accomplished a goal. You can do that. And then set a new one for the next hour. Mm-hmm. And you build upon it. And it's amazing how hour by hour, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, it adds up. And I can personally attest that it works. I'm been good for a long time now. And I have a lot of people I've helped that have been good for a long time now, and they feel like they finally have overcome this, and they're able to now make this weakness a strength.
So I thought that was so good and practical that I just wanted to share with you guys. But he said some important things in there. He kind of reviewed some of what we were learning earlier about the brain. But the purpose of the limbic system is to avoid pain, seek pleasure, not die. Those are very powerful motivators, and they drive our behavior, and especially when the frontal cortex is not operating, which is what happens when the limbic system kicks into place. That's going to drive behaviors in a different way. But here's what's important. When you think of a lot of the dysfunctional, unhealthy, unhelpful things that we do, so much of it is about avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, right? Overeating, drug use, right? I'm telling you, I've had a lot of ice cream this week because my mom's dying. And it's just my human nature. Seek pleasure. I'm uncomfortable. I'm in pain, right? And again, taking the shame out of it and understanding that this is human biology to want to avoid pain, seek pleasure, not die. So the reason that's so important is so many of these behaviors that we have that are unhelpful, unproductive, dysfunctional, unhealthy, harmful, whatever, including watching porn, are out of this place of avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. And so I think important question to ask, what is the pain? What is the pain that we're avoiding? What is the pain we're trying to anesthetize? And you know what I'm talking about, okay? What is that pain? And looking at it and facing that. And then also saying, okay, do I actually just need to make my life something I want to show up for? Maybe we do need to have more fun. Maybe there are things or goals or hobbies or things to include, and it's not just about getting rid of one behavior. It is about that, but also we have to replace it with new, healthier behaviors that are more adaptive in our lives. So I thought that was super powerful. So the first thing in the battle plan is to consider before consuming. And I thought he gave some really practical steps, too, on how to handle that bit. The other part is to know what you actually need. So what is the need that maybe porn, and if you're coaching other men, what is the need that porn is actually filling for you? There's a book that the chairman of our board is reading with his wife right now called Unwanted, and they're going crazy about how amazing this book is. It's written by someone, Jay Stringer, who has gone through Dan Allender's trauma training. And our chairman said it's the first time he's ever read a book that brings up, what kind of porn are you drawn to? And what is that telling you, right? What an important question to ask. What is the need? What's the need that's being filled there? And know what do you actually need? What's the real need behind the need, right? The next thing would be for the battle plan would to be a voice. I already mentioned, you guys are going to be involved in conversations that we'll never have with the men in your life, with the people in your life. Be a voice. You can even start a conversation by saying, I was just at this conference this week. Did you know that, something that was, enlightening to you, and share that and start a dialogue, start a conversation. We actually created this card for you that you can take that's at our table. And it has a list of questions that you can ask yourself, you can ask the men in your life. How do you think watching pornography impacts a person's perception of and behavior towards women? That's a good conversation to have, right? Have you taken any steps to insulate yourself from provocative sexual images? If so, what? A high level of male violence against women, even in mainstream porn, is well documented. How do you think this might affect the developing minds of young men and boys? How do you think violence in porn is connected to the prevalence of sexual assault in our society? These are conversations that you can initiate and have, and break the silence around it, break the shame around it, talk about it. And we have this card at our table. It also has some of our favorite resources on it, including that book, Unwanted. A couple of these resources, POSARC and COSA, are actually for spouses whose partners are dealing with sexual and porn addiction. So this can be a resource for you and the people that you're coaching and mentoring and the people that are in your world. You can grab one of these at our table. And then the final thing in the battle plan is to give restitutionally. 16 years ago, I started having this vision that funds that were fueling the demand would be redirected towards the efforts to bring restoration and recovery to the women. And it's so funny because I remember in the strip club, there was never a shortage of money in there. Men would come and spend their Friday night, their paycheck on Friday. They're throwing dollar bills everywhere. And when you're in ministry and you're running a nonprofit, all of a sudden you're like, where'd the money go? Because there was a lot of money in the strip club. So I have just always had a heart to see this. And when my husband, who and some other board members were calling donors and saying, hey, what led you to want to give to Treasures? Many of the men and even some of the women were saying, well, I used to watch porn, and this is a way for me to give back. And when you think about, are you guys 12-step recovery, celebrate recovery? I've been through that. I love it. But one of the steps is to make amends. And when you think about something like porn, there's no way to make amends to all the people that were on the other end of that, right? But this is a way I think that that people can make amends, is by giving restitutionally. A couple things I want to let you know about the women in your life. If you know of anyone who's interested in helping people who have been exploited or worked in the sex industry, we have a 2-day training coming up in October in LA, and so you can find out information about that at our website. We have a resource table in the back. I mentioned if you want access to the PowerPoint that I did tonight, we're happy to send it to you if you sign up for the newsletter. And my book is also back there. I know that you're men, and you might not read it, although many men do. And actually, the co-founder of Celebrate Recovery said all men should read it. But anyways, that's her words, not mine. No, but seriously though, I wrote this book because I want people to know that healing is possible and their pain can be turned into purpose. And if you have people in your life who have had a history of sexual abuse and trauma, who have had a history of dysfunctional or domestic violence relationships, and want to know that there's hope, my desire in writing this book would be so that they would know that. And so you're welcome to pick up a copy for the lady in your life. And I think that's all I got for now. Thank you guys so much for having me tonight. Appreciate it.